listening to Driving Law, a podcast by Kyla Lee about all things related to the rules of the road.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Driving Law with Kyla Lee. Kyla Lee is in Ottawa today. So today we are doing something that we haven't done in about a year. We're doing the podcast in a vehicle, and we're doing it with Alice and Alison. And Al,
A double age special again.
if you've seen the podcast, if you're a regular viewer, then you know that Alice and Alison were on the podcast about a year ago, and we did it in another green vehicle.
Yeah.
We did it in my green Buick, and this time we were in the green 1971 Chevy pickup truck. And because we thought it's a driving law podcast, it should be in a vehicle every once in a while. Both of these two wonderful people have been with our firm for a while. Alison has been with us for several years because she was a summer student each year between when she was still in law school. And Alison started last year, and we realized that she was a bright light pretty quick. So two of the wonderful students. And the most important thing I want to say at the outset is they both just passed all the bar exams. So congratulations to them both. And next week, they will both be lawyers. This is now paperwork and making sure that all the days are properly counted. So congratulations.
Thank you.
So proud of you both.
Thank you so
It's
much.
so like... So exciting. So it seemed like a good day. It's a Friday morning and we're recording the podcast. And we've got a few things to cover today, but we're also going to talk about articling and lawyer life and where they're headed in their lives. Both of them I know are going to have spectacular careers and do a lot for society. But before we get to that, we started driving to the location where we're parked here in Richmond, and we started talking about something that I think we should talk about today on the podcast. And that is speed on at photo enforced speeding. Now, in British Columbia, little history. We got to go back actually decades. The NDP brought in photo radar, and photo radar was used across the province, but it was basically mobile vehicles would park. They'd be parked at the side of the road. You'd drive by in a spot and you'd be going 10 kilometers an hour over and you would get a ticket. And people hated that. They hated it, understandably so, because they would park like at the bottom of a hill when there's no other traffic. And so it wasn't a safety issue, and it just felt like a cash grab. And Gordon Campbell, who was our premier for a number of years here, campaigned to eliminate photo radar. And that was like the leading thing in his campaign, was to eliminate photo radar, and was elected with an overwhelming majority. The NDP got 2 seats. The NDP was wiped out, and the Liberals ended up getting into power. And so what did they do? The first thing they did was they got rid of photo radar, and people were happy about that. Now, years pass, and the NDP is back in power, and they're looking at it and saying, look, we've got certain intersections in this province that are so prone to bad accidents that we want to have red light cameras, and there was red light cameras, but we want to use these red light cameras for the purpose of enforcing speeding. So it turns out the red light cameras, those photo red light, run the red light, take a picture of your plate as you're crossing over the line and the light's already red, and mail it to you. Those same cameras can be used for speed enforcement. Those companies knew that all along. The government knew it all along, but they didn't do it. And so they instituted this, I don't know, 6 years ago, maybe, in BC again. And there's a recent poll out that says that the majority of British Columbians, this was a poll by Research and Co., so Mario Canseco, nice guy, majority of British Columbians actually would like photo radar back in that form, in that intersection camera thing. And you guys were telling me about an Australian version.
Yeah, we both lived in Australia for a few years because we both went to law school there. And I was driving a lot. And in Australia, one of the practices they have is the radar at almost every stoplight. And it definitely made an impact with how people drove over there because everyone was getting caught left, right, and center. And so there was no going the flow of traffic, or at least in the Gold Coast where I was, it was if you go even just slightly over the posted speed
But
limit.
what's slightly over? Do you know what the threshold
But
is?
I knew people who got tickets with going 2 over. Yeah,
Wow.
it was quite cool. It was
That
very
was a speed limit.
yes, and so people were getting tickets in the mail very frequently. I managed.
Were they demerit tickets or not?
They were demerit, and I know Alice was saying that in some you can get double demerit during holidays.
So you get a demerit ticket for photo radar, because in BC you don't get a demerit ticket, right?
Yeah.
Like in Alberta, you get a ticket, you pay the ticket, it doesn't show up on your driving record because they don't know who the driver is.
Yes, no. Oh, that's interesting. I do think it's different in Australia. They know. It's very easy to appeal it, of course, if you weren't driving your vehicle, someone else is driving. There's
So
we
the
need to.
onus switches to you.
Yes, exactly. I didn't have to go through that, but I had friends who did, just so you.
Well, I got 2 photo radar tickets in Germany, and apparently I have a driving record in Germany.
Oh, that's interesting.
And the photos were of me behind,
Oh,
coming off the Autobahn. You could see my face, and
that's
still going Autobahn speeds at the exit.
yes.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, that would be a real twist if we did that in British Columbia. Thank goodness we don't have that, and in Alberta, because they've got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt who the driver is. I often wonder about the privacy concerns about it. When I got my German ones, it blocked off the images of all the other people in the vehicle. You're sitting there thinking to yourself, like, okay, I'm traveling with somebody who I'm not supposed to be traveling with. Maybe, I happen to be traveling with my family and my kids were in there, but, you never know when it could be somebody else.
Yeah.
Australia is pretty interesting in terms of just kind of codified rights. I would say it's almost governmentally, it's almost in between America and Canada in terms of what the federal government has control over and what the states have control over. In terms of your rights generally, they don't have a Bill of Rights or a charter. So I find that was really interesting when I initially began studying there.
No charter.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I'm thankful that we have the charter. But I want to get back to this Alberta, BC thing. So why this topic came up and where it was headed originally was the fact that Alberta, at the beginning of April, made significant changes to their photo radar scheme. And I got 2 photo radar tickets in Alberta as well, driving my mother's husband, who's since passed away, his vehicle, and maybe one in a rental car, I don't know. But what they've done now, and this was the Alberta government doing it, was they've introduced a 70% reduction in the number of active photo radar locations. So from 2,200 to 650. This was in response to the fact that people in Alberta were pissed because you could get one for going as little as 10 kilometers an hour over the speed limit. They banned them altogether from the highway. Now provincial highways, including Anthony Hendy Drive in Edmonton, Deerfoot Trail in Alberta, or in Calgary rather, banned. So, I was there recently. I could not believe how fast people were driving on Deerfoot Trail. It was absolutely dangerous in my view. It's now zone restricted to schools, playgrounds, and construction sites. And the speed on green can only be used if the person's getting a red light violation at the same time. So if they run a red light and they're speeding, then they can be caught. But if you just speed through a light, you can't get it. So interesting twist that Alberta is now lifting this. Meanwhile, the study I just referred to, that was not the study, the Mario Canseco's poll that he conducted, had a high public approval. 73% of BC residents approved speed on green intersection cameras, and 76% support just fixed speed cameras.
Wow.
That's a lot. Like, what does it say about British Columbians?
Well, that's a good point. I'm surprised that British Columbia is wanting this at this stage. I don't think that necessarily fits with the driving behavior I see on the road, but maybe that's just my personal take. I do think it can be beneficial, but given what happened in Alberta, it'll be interesting to see if that happens in British Columbia as well.
I think people like it conceptually.
Yeah.
There's definitely a safety risk. There are some really bad intersections around the Lower Mainland that I know could probably benefit from more traffic enforcement generally. But like Allison said, I think once people start getting hit by these fines, I think there will be a bit of an opinion change.
That's when it shifts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the grass is always greener, or people forget about how much they hated it, or either way, like
Short-term memory.
yeah, exactly. I think that's probably a large part of it. I think what people aren't taking into account is in the Lower Mainland, at least in BC, you guys both were articling, and so you had to drive around to courthouses.
Oh, yes.
You didn't have to drive around nearly as much as we did because you do have video court.
Yeah.
Like I was just in my car for half the day when I was articling. It was good because I learned the Lower Mainland, but because I'm moving from Edmonton.
Right.
But it was also like spending the whole day in the car. But you've driven around, and like people in the Lower Mainland, we exceed the speed limit. Pretty much everybody does.
Absolutely.
Like it's rare that somebody's driving 5 kilometers an hour over the speed limit.
I remember back, over a decade ago when you're learning to drive, and they taught us that you should be going 10 over as a consistent basis. Yeah.
Except when you're on your driver's test.
Yes. Yeah, they said this is how you actually drive and this is how you pass the test. Kind of like PLTC. This is what you do in practice and this is how you pass PLTC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about PLTC. Yeah, I think ultimately in the end, this is an issue mostly of perception. People talk about having, also in this poll, a significant portion of British Columbians were supportive of reducing the speed limit to 30 kilometers an hour on most side streets. This has been something that has been pushed by a group based out of Victoria, but part of a movement around the world that it's basically just an anti-car movement. And I could see it, like, I don't see any enforcement, and I don't see how that's going to do anything. Most of the side streets, like in Kitsilano, where I live, nobody's driving 50. People are driving 30 for the most part. But if they were driving 50, is there going to be a cop there with a radar gun to enforce it? So
Probably not.
probably not.
Yeah.
So we defend a lot of tickets and spend a lot of time going to traffic court to defend tickets. And it's unfortunate that it's not something that used to be just dumped on the articled students, which wasn't bad training. But these days it's not something that we can persuade a client to do that because so much is riding on their ticket. They always want a lawyer. But pretty soon you're both going to be lawyers, just a matter of days. So let's get back to the old PLTC issue, things I wanted to ask you about. I actually wrote some things down. Most useful piece of articling that was not on any syllabus. No, on your training, on your PLTC. No, hang on. Most useful. You could see why I'm not a professional doing this. Most useful thing that you learned in articling. Whoever's ready to go first. Thing that you learned that you maybe unexpected.
Well, I think for me, at least compared to peers in other firms, the court experience that you guys allow us to do is unlike anywhere else from what I've seen. So I think in that, but that could be expected when we come into the firm. That's part of our daily duties. Otherwise, it's not on a syllabus or not on our job description. I would probably say how to work with everyone in the office. And something that Acumen does so well is everyone's very supportive through each stage of the process. And everyone, it's kind of like a little conveyor belt. Everyone has their duties for every step and it's well functioned. But I think a successful law firm is the ones that when they work well together and they respect and support each other, because then you can get more done. And I don't know if everyone would agree with me in every firm, but that's something that I definitely valued in printing and articling, and I will take going to me.
It's a benefit of the culture, and also it is no doubt about it.
It is so important to have good culture.
Yeah.
People are wanting to work harder. They're wanting to learn more. They're wanting to show up every day. And that makes a huge difference.
there's been times that I had somebody working with me, I worked with, where I was an employee or I was the employer. And there was somebody there who was just, it was so hard. And you felt sick going in each day. And the nice thing is, for a long time, we've got such a good culture in our office that you did a lot of guilty pleas where they were essentially a joint submission. So we didn't have to panic about, like, we're going into court and we're arguing, telling the judge the same thing the prosecutor's telling the judge, that we've formed an agreement here. And that, I think, is probably a very useful thing, because you're tweaking stuff, but you don't really have to fight too much about it because everybody's more or less in agreement. What other things in court did you do that you thought were useful for learning?
Well, I did do some traffic court situations. Yeah, I did a couple, and one, a couple times the police officer doesn't show up, and that's very standard. But there have been a couple where I've had to sit in a room with a police officer and try to negotiate a little deal. Yeah, and that skill is something I wanted to learn, the negotiation part. And when you're negotiating with someone who's not a lawyer, it's very different with when you're speaking to a lawyer. And
Well, they're the witness too, right? Like, they're the witness, the prosecutor, everything. So, and sometimes they're a little bit more invested than a prosecutor might be.
Completely different approach speaking to them in the little interview room versus a lawyer.
When we're done today, I'm going to tell you the one thing that probably nobody told you. The secret weapon. I actually learned it from another lawyer, a friend of mine, and it actually does work.
Okay, great. Yeah. I feel like my thing was to kind of schmooze and break down that little relationship and but form that respect, because I'm an articled student. I'm not the lawyer that they've been speaking to up to this point. And
well, I'll tell you the problem. There's a problem there. And the problem there is the lawyers. And it's not the lawyers in our office, but there's lawyers who go in there and they're like, figure they're going to be all tough with this police officer. And I'm a lawyer, you're a police officer, and you should know them. And like, that approach never, ever works for a number of reasons. The police officers know their job. You're not showing up there and with some sort of secret that they don't know about. Like, they know their job, and they don't necessarily have a great deal of respect for lawyers. They might, if you're nice, they're going to be open to you. But if that reputation that is developed by lawyers going in there being like overly forceful, I think it doesn't. So you have to break over that hurdle. At that point, you can actually talk to them about the facts in the case and your client situation. Trying to resolve it. Yeah. So it's part of the approach.
What about you? Did you do any traffic court?
I think I was meant to, and then things just kind of fell apart, as they often do.
Well, you have been leading on all sorts of other different things too. So what would you say you learned in articling that you didn't expect?
I think not necessarily something unexpected, but something that's never really taught or emphasized is the skill of observing.
Yes.
I think that's very important in all aspects of life, in every workplace as well. You observe the people you're around, your colleagues, you observe how they like to work, how they respond to what you're telling them. The same thing in court. When you go into court as an articled student, you're not going to be called first. And the benefit of that is that you get to listen to senior counsel making submissions. You get to listen to how judges respond to those submissions, how counsel will address the judge or the JJ, whoever's presiding. And then you take that kind of information and then you work it into whatever you're doing. When you're talking to a client, you observe how they respond to certain types of questions or how they like to speak, what is making sense to them, what's not making sense to them, what seems to be important to them, what seems to be less important. And that really drives conversations and makes things more streamlined.
Yeah. Absolutely. That value of getting to watch what's going on in the courtroom is part of the socialization of becoming a lawyer. And it's very useful. Seeing how judges respond and seeing how people respond that's good and bad. And, and same with judges. They're not all on their perfect day every day, is very useful. The learning that I struggle with still, but I'm pretty good at it, and I'm not as good as Kyla is, and a lot of the other lawyers in the firm probably, is listening to witnesses and responding to witnesses during cross-examination. That's something, unfortunately, you don't get until you get to court and are running trials, but having that skill developed sitting and watching it. That was an interesting comment. Appreciate it. Um, we're 19 minutes in. We want to make sure that we're on track here. What did you learn in PLTC? So in BC, we have PLTC. PLTC is the professional legal training course. And these are the last group of individuals who have gone through it, because starting in the next group, they are doing a standardized course for most of the provinces across the country, a new bar course for all of Canada. I don't know how I feel about it, but PLTC, the PLTC material was almost identical 27 years ago when I went through it as what you guys had. What do you think you got from PLTC?
What did I get? I mean, I can tell you what I didn't get, but
Well, you tell me that too. What did you get? What did you not get?
I actually think at its core, PLTC is a good course. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the areas of law I didn't touch on here or before. And I think if I needed to know anything, it is in the materials we were given for the most part, at least at a basic level. But unfortunately, we are in the times post-COVID, and that made it an online course. So we, for those 10 weeks, were at home in our bedrooms doing online school, and some of the assessments were impacted by
The method.
the method. And I think maybe the material we learned was good, but maybe the way that they assessed is not as practical as it used to be. So I do understand why they're transitioning it. I think we both worked really hard and it worked out for us, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who that change maybe is not as successful. And then I do think that lack of socialization, being kind of isolated in our houses, and we're lucky we knew each other. We weren't in the same cohort, but and we knew other people who were doing it or who have done it. So we had resources and people to rely on.
Because you'd already been in articling.
Yeah.
Like I went straight to PLTC.
Yeah.
I would have just been sitting on a computer screen. I wouldn't have met anybody.
And that, I stand by it. I don't know how you would get through it both mentally and just pass-wise if you were alone and had no one to speak through some of these things with.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
no doubt. I never even thought of that.
We're lucky, but I know there's people who are not as fortunate in our position. And, you know, if PLTC were continuing, I would always recommend to do it in the middle or late part of your articles, because
Things just make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that because you've already been out in the
Yeah.
world practicing and basically. That's interesting. I didn't think about that aspect, but they just being able to talk through things with somebody else there at the time. I did it right at the beginning of my articles before I started working in a firm, and I was just lucky, I guess, that I was in that class and terrified about failing. We noticed that the pass rate dropped significantly when people started, when it went online. I was very pleased that both of you were, but as I told you many times, I was confident that you both would, because you had this experience in the firm. But yeah, no doubt. Your thoughts on?
I think the challenge with any standardized testing is it's almost like a pump and dump. You pump your brain full of the information that you need, and then you dump it out, and then you kind of forget it. That's the challenge with, I think, a lot of education generally. But you have to balance it with needing to have some sort of standards. What I did learn actually was it reminded me of how to quickly find information again. That's a big aspect of both the barristers and solicitors exams. Certainly, I've done a lot of last-ditch trial research for not just Kyla, but also other lawyers in the firm who are in court, and they'll call me and they'll say, I need this in 15 minutes. And I'm like, oh my God. And it's pure chaos. But it's a nice refresher of how to hone that skill and how to get to the point that you need faster.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Those good points. And I have like 50 things here, so we're not going to One thing you wish somebody had told you on day one of your articles. Start this time with you, Alice.
I think imposter syndrome is a very real thing. I think I read somewhere during my articles, it's called the practice of law, for a lot of reasons. But one of the reasons that you can kind of interpret this is you're always practicing. You're always learning. You're always practicing skills. You're always building on those skills. I wish that someone would have told me that it's normal to feel like you don't know anything. Even after 9 months plus of articling, plus PLTC and doing all this study, I still feel like I don't know a lot of things, which I think is a positive. Something that a mindset that I really tried to hold throughout PLTC was just having the joy of learning.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really kept my mental health going during those 11 weeks and during all that intensive study. That, there was nothing for me to lose, but everything to gain. And so that's something that I wish I had reminded myself of or had been reminded of at the start of articles.
I think, by the time you've written the bar exam, the thought process you have is that somebody has thought about what they need to impart to you so you can go out there and practice. And so you feel, okay, I should be skilled enough. And then the moment you get out there, you're, confronted with things that you don't even know how to conceive of the question that you need to be asking to deal with this thing. And you're sitting there saying to yourself, okay, now I must have just faked it. And how did I end up here? And I'm still 26 years practicing, and I'm still going through this process of I forgot so many things, and then the fact scenario comes up again, and I'm still trying to peel it together. Imposter syndrome, I think, is almost universal, but not necessarily universal. Your thoughts?
I might echo a bit of what you said because I remember once in law school, someone asked one of the lawyers who came and did a talk, and they said, "When do you feel like you know what you're doing?" And they said, "Never." And this person had been called for at least 20 years at this point, and they said they're still figuring it out every day. There's always a new issue, and maybe I think prior to starting articling, I always like to know what I'm doing. I over prepare. I like to go in with everything kind of outlined and every possible situation that could go wrong, have it at least covered. And I think what I learned was improv or being able to adapt on the fly is a skill. And if you just show up every day and are willing to learn, that skill comes with time. And so I think knowing that and knowing it's okay to not know how to do everything and that you won't is something I would have told myself at the beginning. So.
Good points. I will tell you the only person who did not have imposter syndrome, you can guess who it is. Somebody you both know. Kyla never experienced that, just never experienced it. And she's sharp, she's smart, she had an answer all the time. Doesn't mean her answers were necessarily correct, but for the most part, I think to myself, if she didn't succeed, it wasn't her that wasn't correct, it was the judge.
I agree with that.
So often it's the case. All right, I want to know, you're both going to be lawyers next week. What is one promise that you can make to your future clients?
Good question.
I'm not going to know everything immediately, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
I like to make them feel comfortable so that they will tell me more because I find a lot of people are very hesitant to tell their story and their background out of worries that it might get them in trouble or they'll be embarrassed. And I think when you're dealing with vulnerable people, I would like them to know it'll be okay. Just tell me the whole story.
You both have interviewed a lot of people, which is every time one of our students goes to PLTC, I'm 100% confident that they're going to do well on the interview part because they've all interviewed so many people. But it's not necessarily the case, unfortunately. But people are scared of lawyers. And they're reluctant to reveal that information. And very often that's the key information that you need to get. And it requires fleshing it out in so many different ways to get to that point. It's a funny thing, but you get relatively skilled at it, and it's actually makes for really good direct examination brain if you can, once you've done that. Advice for any students in law school who are thinking about driving law. This is the Driving Law Podcast, after all.
Very thematic.
Well, trying to stay on topic without Kyla here.
Oh, maybe I'd say there's more to it than you think. I don't think many people think about driving law as one of the avenues you can go into.
It's because I invented it.
Yeah, well, exactly. But I've got to say there is a lot of different aspects. I mean, we deal with IRP hearings, traffic court, we do driving while prohibited, we're doing that full court process up until the disposition. There's lots of aspects that you can learn and many skills you can gain within this very narrow field. And I think a lot of people would be surprised by that. So if you're interested in getting a lot of barrister courtroom experience, this is a good avenue to look into. So
I will tell you, many years ago, I was involved in some heavy litigation that involved 5 different insurance companies. And we got to a point where we had like a bit of an impasse, and we had to go into court, and just like we were putting everything on hold. Basically, it wasn't a really consequential thing, but we had to get permission from the court. And I was a junior lawyer. I was like a 4-year call lawyer. And all these lawyers were senior heavy duty lawyers in these big towers downtown. And we were going into court for this thing. And these people did not like present as being comfortable in court at all. And I've never felt that, like, I'm not a person who's really comfortable in my own skin. So I expect to not feel comfortable in court, but compared to them, after my years of going to court for dispositions, trials on impaired driving cases, and all of these things that I've done, here I am, my hourly rate is much lower than their hourly rates, and all of them just appeared to be out of place because they didn't have that same daily courtroom experience that you get in this practice.
yeah, that's a good point. Makes a huge difference. I don't think people really give that enough credit.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, once you start going to court more, you realize that judge is just really not much different than you. And you're just trying to explain it to them. And if you have persuaded yourself that your position is actually worthwhile, you should be able to persuade it to them if they're a reasonable person, and presumably they are.
Absolutely.
I think pretty similar to Allison, actually. Driving law touches on a lot of different aspects of law or different areas of law. Like IRPs are administrative. You have charter constitutional law as well. There's some property stuff involved in it as well, sometimes with the vehicles themselves, in criminal law too. So
The insurance aspect.
exactly. So you think of driving law maybe as kind of a small area of law because you're thinking of vehicles. You're thinking of just driving maybe your day-to-day life. But it's so much more than that.
Yeah, I think there's actually, I will tell you how I persuaded Kyla that she should stick with driving law. And that was that I explained to her, you go look at the cases that are the leading charter cases, and so many of them are in the context of a traffic stop. So many of them are as a result of police contact, when somebody's being dealt with and investigated in impaired driving, dangerous driving, stopped, and the police find drugs in the car or something like that. They end up going to the Supreme Court of Canada. And so if you're interested in charter litigation, then, this is an area of practice to go into. The problem, of course, is that, everybody's sitting there thinking about how you're going to make a living. And when you're dealing with traffic tickets, you just can't charge the fee that you would as dealing with business law, for example, which is probably why so many people are aspiring to something other than driving law. And the other thing is, in so many different ways, we, can be shut down by the government in one way or another. So it's it's a risky practice. Look at all of those ICBC lawyers. All of those ICBC lawyers were driving law experts in their field. So, personal injury related to car accidents. And the government, with one piece of legislation, eliminated the lawyers in the process, and lawyers had not figured out how to get themselves back into the process. And, a democratically elected government manages to do this. And nobody's been able to persuade the public that lawyers should be let back in. You can find lots of good examples where people have been badly injured, not properly compensated as a result of the essentially no fault aspect of this. But I'm not saying a lot on my insurance, but there's no hue and cry to bring that in, and that was just legislation enacted that did that and put thousands of lawyers in the situation where they're having to pivot to something else.
Yeah, it changed everything, and everyone who did personal injury practice is, not.
It happened to me too, right? It happened to me in 2010. The BC government introduced the IRP scheme. Before that, I used to schedule 3 impaired driving trials a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I would resolve one a few months before, typically one a week before. Sometimes I wouldn't resolve it, but I knew I was coming close. And then there was one I'd have to prepare the trial for. And usually the one I was running the trial for, it would be done by 11 o'clock in the morning. Something that the police officer would say or testify about or not bring or forget, or the prosecutor would forget to elicit some evidence about, or there'd be some conflict and then we'd negotiate it out because there's like 3 other trials set on the list. But that was a good living, and there was a lot of lawyers who did it, and average of $5,000 to $7,500 for a one-day trial for most of those ones back then. That was a good way to earn a living. You could afford to pay for a student, a secretary, and an office. But then when the IRP scheme came out, the government, part of the reason that they did it was because they wanted to get the money that the lawyers were getting, and we realized with an IRP, we have to move fast. It's got to be quick. There's no dilly-dallying, and we have to do this on the cheap for people. And it was an issue of completely reorganizing the practice. But with a swoop of the pen, the government eliminated, 20 impaired driving lawyers in the province and left basically us and a handful of other people who do the odd IRP and things like that. And then Kyla came along and, basically locked up much of the market, but still. It was, you run that risk, I suppose, but I guess in any area of practice. The biggest risk now, though, is
AI.
Yeah. And it's where do you see the risks for it? Let's talk about AI. We're over time, but
The immediate risk right now is, and I get this a lot actually, especially when I do Mandarin language consults.
yes,
People use AI. They say, my AI says this can happen. My AI says I can get this result for sure from the court. And they're so convinced as to the truthfulness or the believability, I guess, or reliability of whatever their AI is telling them, that they're not willing to listen to an actual practitioner anymore.
Well, there's no AI in court. There's no AI watching it. There's no internet watching what's going on in court to know what's happening in court. So it's got all of that wrong. That's a really good point.
Yeah, I think it's proving to people that, AI cannot do the full job, that there's still worth in lawyers as well as any other practice, because having a real person who can understand your circumstances and explain that to the court in person is still valuable. And I mean, we've seen it. We do a lot of affidavits as articled students, and I can't even tell you how many times they've sent me one they would prefer that they just drafted on ChatGPT, but ChatGPT was not able to showcase what needed to be showcased for an IRP hearing, at least without the lens of a lawyer behind it. So there's still value.
Yeah. ChatGPT is not, doesn't know the adjudicators. ChatGPT doesn't know what's that guy could get screwed. That should be photo radar. The ChatGPT or any of the AI do not understand the facial expressions of the judge. They don't understand that this particular judge is focused on this, and they think that it's about the niceties, and the respectfulness and tone, and that's basically one of the few things that it gets correct. But sometimes it does get actual points correct, which is an interesting thing as well, because what we've noticed now, Kyla's conducting a trial. What did we used to do when an issue came up that was weird? She would text us, right? She'd be posting things on Slack saying, somebody research this, I need to know about this. Meanwhile, now she's doing that. Sometimes she posts on the listservs that she belongs to, but she's also sitting there and asking 4 different AIs. And she's able to frame it very well. And often it will come up with, well, this might not be right, but you might want to explore this. And she's sitting there thinking to herself, okay, yeah, maybe I do. So it's almost like superhumanized her when she was a superhuman to start with, where she's now advancing arguments that, are responses. Now, things would come up in the middle of a trial. Something would come up and I'd be going, that's not quite right. And I don't know how to frame it. And I'm not, Kyla, this is me when I used to conduct trials all the time. But I wouldn't necessarily know how to frame it. And I didn't have somebody to call. Like that's one of the values of being a lawyer is you can pick up the phone and call another lawyer and you're not getting billed because they're your friend. But in the middle of a trial, you can't do that. But you're sitting there with your laptop and you don't have to wait for somebody else to respond 2 hours later when they see the message. You can just discuss it right there, which is going to, I can already see that it's creating hurdles for judges, courts, prosecutors, because, something that you hear that you thought that wasn't in the disclosure. The police officers now testified about this. Is this a charter violation? You can ask right there some AI and find out, and you can stand up and say, you know what, I think what we just heard from this police officer is going to require further inquiry. I didn't give charter notice on this, but this to me is whatever. As I hear this new evidence come out, Section 7, because it's new evidence. But in any event, yeah, I think that's going to change it, and I can imagine the length of the processes here.
Yeah. Well, I do think it's AI in general. You are only going to benefit moving forward if you learn to use it as a tool for your benefit in practice. And if you try to avoid it and fight it, you're going to fall behind. The world is moving too quick. And I do think there's a world where lawyers like Kyla and all of us, that you can use it as a tool with whatever task you're doing, but you still need that real person behind it.
I was reading something about AI and law this week because I was writing an article for it for LinkedIn, and it was talking about, over the next 15 years, the practice is really going to change. What the fuck are you talking about? It's like over the next 6 months, everything's changing. Like it's changing all the time. I think there are going to be lawyers who are like, you don't need somebody to sit there and type out and reformat that whole contract. That is now a 5-minute job with AI, and it will often figure out things that need to be in there that you had not considered, and will also recognize things that don't match up, like where you're referring to, and subsection 3B up above, it'll figure all that out too. So it's going to streamline things, makes it harder to charge those fees when you can write a contract in 15 minutes instead of 6 hours. So it's certainly going to change the practice as far as that's concerned. It may be that we don't need nearly as many lawyers. I don't know. I mean, everything changed for me over the course of my career. I started practicing. I did prostitution offenses. I defended simple possession of cannabis. I did lots of grow ops. Dial-a-dopes were like my bread and butter because I'd get 2-3 of those a month. And of course I started doing impaired driving. I got into the technology, which took me in a different direction than everybody else, which was useful for me. But the entire thing changed. Yeah. So I guess this is an exciting time where the entire thing changes for you.
Yeah, we're going to have to go with it.
You are both creative and you're both very smart. And so I'm looking forward to you doing great things. Are there any laws that you look at that you think should be challenged, charter challenged? This is a throw-out question. You don't have to have an answer for it.
The cop-out answer is whatever Kyla thinks should be charter challenge.
Yeah, Carter, I trust her. So, yeah.
Kyla is we're not just buttering her toast while she's not here, but she is quite unusual. There's no doubt about it. And she usually has longer term visions for things that she wants to take out. It's useful to practice with her for that purpose. one of the things that we found since the pandemic and even leading up to the pandemic is she conducts more trials than anybody in the office. Historically, we'd like to take articled students to trials. Sometimes the students were too busy skiing at Whistler, so they couldn't come to, but you guys haven't been like that. But you've been able to watch some of the trials on video, I guess. So that's been probably quite useful. And she chats with you as well on Slack during the course of the trials while you're watching it on video, because she tells me about, your feedback, which is, I think has been, she's enjoyed a lot. That's an interesting technological change for us.
No, I do enjoy seeing her on the MS Teams video reading our messages in real time.
Yeah.
And
Oh, you could see her reading your messages.
pop up. And
Or we're asking for more research and things.
Yeah. Actually, it's an interesting thing because you're sitting there as a lawyer and you're trying to read the judge. How did the judge perceive that? How did, and you're sitting there thinking, how are other people perceiving that? And when you've got people who can give you that real-time feedback right there that's precise, it is very useful, I think, to know that came across, or that police officer, what he just said, came across as complete, utter rubbish. And getting that from 3 people who are watching the thing is probably quite useful.
yeah, it's always a benefit when they have a separate camera on the judge. I think that we really see their reactions.
Because Kyla doesn't get to see their faces. Yeah. So many of the trials that we have end up proceeding out of town. The ones that are in the lower mainland often don't proceed because Kyla's found something in there and those prosecutors know her and they're not going to spend 3 days in court to run a trial when there's a resolution at hand. But very often out of town, prosecutors feel differently about things. And so that's why you end up watching it on video rather than going and sitting in. But I think it is useful. When she was first called, I told her, here's some of the other lawyers out there who are really good. And I gave her a list of them. And I said, there's like Jamie Butler and James Sutherland and a few other people. Shelley Sugarman, I think, was on my list. And I said, if you can go watch something that they're doing, you'll gain a lot, because it's very hard to teach cross-examination. And I did my best trying to teach cross-examination. And those were people who had internalized those rules. When I watched them cross-examining, they were all very good. So I think there's huge benefit to watching it on MS Teams. I'm sorry, folks, it's not just generally something that you can watch. You're logging in as a lawyer. It's an interesting thing. Well, thank you both for joining me on the podcast. We went way over time, 47 minutes right now. Next week, Kyla will be back. Tune in for another exciting episode of Driving Law. And don't contact us if you got a photo radar, because you're not getting any demerits. There's no value in contacting us for that. But if you have any other driving law issue, you can find us at vancouvercriminallaw.com, 604-685-8889. And tune in next week for another exciting episode of Driving Law.